we jump to the main session, let me invite Dr. Aziz Setiarini, MSc, Faculty of Faculty of Public Health, to give a welcoming speech from the faculty. To Dr. Aziz Setiarini, the stage is yours. Thank you, Dr. Aziz, for your warm welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, this event will never be happened without the contribution from Indonesia. Therefore, I will invite Professor Agus Suwandono, MPH, Dr. PH, Vice Coordinator and Program Asur, Program Implementation Strategies in Indonesia, to give a greetings from Indonesia. To Professor Agus Suwandono, the stage is yours. The stage.
Tes lagi, Mbak.
Tes suaranya, Mbak.
Halo. Ya, tes. Selamat pagi semuanya. Oke, selamat pagi semuanya. Hari ini kita akan melaksanakan seminar guest lecture bersama Indofood dan juga IAPMI. Semuanya ini akan dimulai dari jam 9 sampai jam 1 siang.
Oke, makasih Mas.
Yang ini ya? Coba boleh agak di sini.
Kalau
Ini pakai apa?
kalau clip on itu nanti gini, itu kan nanti yang pakai pembicara. Nah, kalau pembicara ganti gimana sih?
Kemarin tuh saya pakai caranya si clip-onnya ditaruh dekat speaker sih Pak. Jadi nggak diganti-ganti orang-orang. Kalau kayak gitu ya resiko.
Coba ininya apa mode ceknya kayak apa?
Gini aja ya, Pak. Ini gantung, Pak. Iya kan? Ini ntar kalau kita geser-geser, enak, Pak. Atau gimana?
Justru nempel aja.
Kanan kiri gitu kan?
Macam
Ah, yang itu apa aja? Taruh bawah aja ya, Pak. Bawah aja, Pak.
nyampe nggak?
Oh, ini nggak nyampe. Ininya nih.
Because of that, USAID initiated One Health Workforce Project, or known as OHW, which is three key areas. Those are multi-sector
Gini, Pak,
education,
cek ya.
education and training, and institutional strengthening. Since 2014, OHW project has been implemented in 2 continents in
Bisa
Africa,
cabutnya deh.
known as One Health Central and Eastern Africa as OHCEA, and in Asia, known as Southeast One Health University Network, or COE. The collaboration has spread across 162 faculties and 84 universities in 12 countries.
Nggak bisa.
As one of the
Beda
biggest
model jacknya mbak kita.
Oh, oke.
Kita punya yang gede tuh, yang jack
Oh
kapsul.
ya, tahu.
important role in global health. Indonesia One Health University
Beda-beda.
Oh, jadi orang nih pak, nggak bisa pak.
is the frontline and
Kalau ada jacknya sih kemungkinan bisa.
Kita nggak punya, kalau cek cuma di ini biasanya kita pakai.
focuses on fostering One Health collaboration in Indonesia that encourages
Kalau ini kan juga biasanya masih bisa ini ya kedengerannya.
Ini pakai shotgun mic atau pakai
Pakai ini.
Coba pakai yang jack ini.
yang lain? Berapa sih pak? Kenapa bisa ngirim nggak sama ya frekuensinya?
Indo-Moon has three main focuses, and those are education and training, multi-sectoral engagement, and institutional strengthening. Since 2014, Indo-Moon has successfully achieved many things, including 7,679 people who have participated in
Makasih banyak pak,
Indo-Moon
saya
activities.
ini ya, share kamu ya, broadcast tiap media pak.
Share aja di sini kontennya.
Apa?
Share aja.
Oh ya, saya kan mau buka Q&A. Saya jadi admin sama apa ya? Maksudnya ada ide cuma chat aja.
Not only training, Indo-Moon has other supporting educational initiatives, including 37 training modules, 35 online classes, and initiated an online platform with One Health approach all island, 13 community project proposals, dissemination of information through 4 online media, including Instagram, website, YouTube, and
Kalau kemari bos. Kemari.
It has 34 faculties, 1 university members, and has global networks that are connected in various parts of the world. Education and training is the main foundation in improving human capacity. Indo-Moon has
Ini kan jacknya dia. Hah? Kayaknya
Indonesia. Those are Global Health True Leaders, GHTL Training. GHTL has trained 453
Gini aja,
leaders
bisa.
in 13 batches
Gini aja, ya bisa.
Malaysia, Vietnam,
Bapak ntar kena ininya, palanya harus nunduk lah, kurang nunduk.
DR, Cambodia, China,
Ya udah.
Nepal, and Myanmar. Global Health Diplomacy, GHD Training. The first and only global health diplomacy training in Asia. GHD has trained 95 health professionals in 3 batches to alleviate human capacity and diplomacy skill towards global health issue from various disciplines and regions in Indonesia, and has involved 208 participants at a popular seminar called Diplomacy Means Action. Infectious Disease Management Training, IDMT. IDMT has 123 epidemiology officers in 10 districts, cities, in 2 provinces in Indonesia to implement outbreak investigation through One Health approach. IDMT has also produced 7 modules to support the implementation of the training. Other than that, IDMT has more than 3,200 viewers on YouTube to improve public knowledge on
Si Alam nih.
Terbatas dari. balik.
Ini kabelnya agak enak.
Hah?
Ini kabelnya sekali.
Ya udah, gitu aja. Bolong ini, Pak. Nih. Mau langsung kesini aja? Hah? Mau langsung kesini? Nggak, maksudnya ininya kan?
Oh, ini lakban.
Lakbannya. Oh, saya. Saya. Hah? Lagi. Udah, Pak. Udah. Tinggal diganjel. Daripada pegang. Kesini sih, kayak kemarin. Tapi ini kenceng sih, Pak. Pak. Kenceng kok.
Cek. Cek, cek.
Kenceng, Pak. Udah, Pak. Cukup ya? Kenceng, Pak. Kenceng, Pak. Hmm?
and sensitive to surroundings. Growing is out to lower the qualified teaching world through collaborative of Northern Power presents texts and photographs of about 7 programs and keyword is. The needs of the professional health and safety is increasing, along with the upgrade of transportation to industrial Indonesia. To overcome the needs, the faculty of public health presents a master program on professional health and safety with the use of cognitive graduates whose able to think critically and systematically. Also, the graduates to have the full knowledge of science and theory of the safety workplace, so that the graduates able to develop and
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I will be presenting to you some introduction to give an overview of this room's layout and evacuation steps if an emergency happens. You are now at Auditorium Rumpun Ilmu Kesehatan Universitas Indonesia.
This room is located on the third floor of C Building, Rumput Ilmu Kesehatan, Universitas Indonesia. It is important to know the evacuation route if an emergency situation happens. This room has two main doors located behind your right and left. There are two main potential emergencies that may occur. First, fire and earthquake. If there is a fire, please keep calm and don't panic, because this room has a fire extinguisher located right next to the main doors. Immediately, please inform the source location of the fire to the officer. And second, if the earthquake occurs, please do drop, cover, and hold the metal. First, drop your body. Second, cover your head with your hands, and then drop and cover under the table or chair. And the last, wait until the earthquake subsides. Once again, if an emergency situation happens, please keep calm and don't panic. Get out through the main doors and go to the assembly point. The assembly point is located at the parking area of B Building, Rumput Ilmu Kesehatan, Universitas Indonesia. You can reach UI's emergency number is at 14001, or you can use UI Panic Button application that is available in the Play Store. Once again, UI's emergency number is at 14001. Please enjoy the event, keep it clean, and don't forget to prioritize your safety and health, because safety culture is our culture. Thank you.
Baik, selamat pagi, Bapak Hadirin sekalian. Mohon perhatian sebentar. Sebelum acara hari ini dimulai, seperti yang telah disampaikan di bagian registrasi, bagi peserta yang merupakan dari mahasiswa dan dari umum, dimohon kesediaannya untuk mengisi survei pelatihan berbasis online yang dapat diakses di link tersebut. Jadi survei ini merupakan survei yang diselenggarakan oleh Indohun yang bertujuan untuk melihat perilaku mahasiswa dan publik terhadap pemilihan pelatihan berbasis online. Mungkin kita akan mengisi surveinya bersama-sama, jadi mohon disiapkan gadgetnya sekarang. Waktu pengisian survei akan berlangsung maksimal selama 10 menit. Jika sudah selesai nantinya, teman-teman bisa screenshot bagian belakangnya, bagian halaman terakhir dari surveinya, dan nanti bisa ditunjukkan pada saat keluar dari ruangan ini ketika acara telah selesai. Gimana teman-teman? Gadgetnya udah siap semua? Udah dibuka linknya? bit.ly/survei kecil semua hurufnya ya. Oke. Kalau sudah buka semua, pengisian surveinya dimulai dari sekarang. Untuk teman-teman yang baru datang, silakan langsung akses link berikut dan diisi surveinya. untuk teman-teman yang baru hadir bisa langsung diakses surveinya di tautan berikut. Dan waktu pengisian surveinya 5 menit lagi. Jika ada yang sudah selesai mengisi surveinya, jangan lupa untuk di screenshot di halaman penutup, halaman terakhir, dan nanti dimohon untuk ditunjukkan pada saat keluar dari ruangan ini. Baik, waktu pengisian survei telah selesai. Bagi yang belum selesai mengisi atau mengalami kendala, bagi yang sudah belum selesai mengisi silakan dilanjutkan. Dan bagi yang mengalami kendala, silakan bisa menghubungi panitia yang ada di belakang. Dan jangan lupa di screenshot pada halaman terakhir surveinya untuk nanti ditunjukkan pada saat keluar dari ruangan ini. Terima kasih dan selamat mengikuti kegiatan hari ini.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Studio Generale on Child Health Development and Environment, a global health perspective. I must welcome the Master of Ceremony. Would like to say my gratitude to all the distinguished speakers. The first, Professor Ban Paktarisman, MPhil PhD. The second, Yasmin Bogari, MPH. And the third, Isabel Wu, PhD. And it's also an honor for us to have all lectures of global health class, such as Professor Sudarto Rotno Atmojo, MSc, Professor Dr. Usari Supeni Joko Sujono, MSc, Professor Dr. Rahmadi Purwana, Professor Dr. Ratna Juwita, MPH, Professor Dr. Nasrin Kodi, MPH, Dr. Helder, Professor Fatma Lestari, MSc, PhD, and Dr. Indri Hapsari Susilowati, MSc, PhD. Also, thank you for the representative of Indonesian Public Health Association, or IAPMI, for coming to this event. And also, it is our highest honor to have Dr. Asi Setiarini, MSc, Vice Dean of Faculty of Public Health in this event. I also would like to greet all the enthusiast participants that reach almost 500 people of you, and also our online participants in the webinar. Yes, we are very amazing because a lot of enthusiast people, a lot come to this event. Please give a round of applause to all of us. This Studio Generale of Child Health Development and Environment, a global health perspective, is the follow-up event from the Childhood Infection Pollution, or known as CHIP workshop. It was held in the previous week by Indonesia One Health University Network, or Indohood, Access to Global Health, and also Hong Kong University. And this event was positively conducted with a collaboration between Indohood, Faculty of Public Health, and Indonesia Public Health Association, or IAPMI. So please give our biggest appreciation to Indohood, Faculty of Public Health, and IAPMI. Thank you. And before we jump to the main session, let me invite Dr. Asi Setiarini, MSc, Vice Dean of Faculty of Public Health, to give a welcoming speech from the faculty. To Dr. Asi Setiarini, the stage is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat on studying general ethics. 2020, Dr. Pam Dolika, MPhil PhD from Columbia University, and then also Yasmin Boka in MBA, and Isabel Go from University College London. Also honorable for all participants, especially for our students. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First, let us extend gratitude to President of Allah because of His mercy we can gather together in this moment. On behalf of Public Health Universitas Indonesia, we thank to Indopun because already facilitate for the expert to be here, and also we thank to our guest lecturer here, Prof. Pam and Yasmin, and also Isabel for the lecture today. Thank you for your coming and for sharing. As we know that child development is influenced by many factors. Some factors is environmental factor. And we know from many literature, and also I think we have an expert here also in Faculty of Public Health, Professor Budi Haryanto, because we have a lot of research on climate change actually. We know that exposure of environment will influence our child development. And to respond in this situation, our guest lecture, Prof. Pam will deliver about early life, environmental exposure, and child development. And also, Yasmin Bokari and Isabel will deliver the first stage of childhood infection and also in urban slum across the country, namely Indonesia, India, and Brazil. Yes, talking about the children is a very important thing, I think, for us, because it also talking about our quality of resources. Okay, once again, thank you for our guest lecture, for Indopun facilitate this study today. Officially, I open this lecture. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Last but not least, to all participants, I wish this lecture will enrich your knowledge, and I hope you enjoy this study. Thank you. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Aziz Setiani, for your warm welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you that this event never will happen without the contribution from the Indopun. Therefore, I will invite the representative of Indopun, Professor Agus Suwandono, MPH, Dr. PH, Vice Coordinator of Program Implementation Strategies in Indopun, to give a greeting from Indopun. To Professor Agus Suwandono, the stage is yours.
Good morning. Selamat pagi untuk semuanya. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semuanya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. On behalf of Professor Piku, the coordinator of Piku, I want to welcome all of you to this very important study lecture. Gathering. And I also want to thank to Professor Ben Putra, also Yasmin Burhanin, and also Isabel for their willingness to give the lecture today, and also to support all of us. I also want to thank to approach that try to develop the group in terms of solving the health problems in Indonesia, which usually is, cannot be solved by the health sector only. So that we try to be together, make collaborations, make a good communication, and make a good coordination with the other faculty within the health sciences. In the group of the Indonesia group was established in 2012. This is actually under the project of the ATT on health purpose that supported by the and in 2014 we have 34 faculties and 20 universities registered. This consists of School of Public Health, School of Medicine, and School of Veterinary Medicine, and also School of Nursing. And in 2015, we will become a formal registered entity by law in Indonesia, so that this is become very formal institution. This is a member of the group. We have 20 universities and also 34 faculties throughout Indonesia. Sorry, the expression of the degree. But it's really important to mention here that we have also the One Health Operating Center in Indonesia. We have 5. Yeah, we have 5 One Health Operating Center, which is the function of One Health Operating Center is to promote the One Health activity in terms of lecturing and community outreach and also research. This 5 One Health Operating Center is in Banda Aceh, in Yogyakarta, in Surabaya, Brunei, in Bali, Nusa Tenggara, and also in University of Cendrawasih. This is the new one. And then I believe that in the future we will have another One Health Operating Center that cover all of Indonesia. The reason that we should have the One Health Operating Center because the span of control of the University of Indonesia very spread out all of the islands in Indonesia, so that we need a more One Health Operating Center to help in the group to carry out the activity of One Health in Indonesia. Now, this is maybe I should also explain that under the One Health workforce, we have 2 big regional networking. It's called as the SIBUN and POSIA. SIBUN is the Southeast Asia One Health University. Is the secretariat is in Bangkok, and POSIA is One Health Central East Africa network. And Indonesia is part of the SIBUN. And also Indonesia has another collaboration with another network, it's Hot Networks, and part of the APIR. APIR is the Asia Partnership Emerging Infectious Research. And now the secretariat of the APIR is in Indonesia. And this is the collaboration that already developed by the group. We work with so many institutions that you can pick here. For example, like workplace placement. This is activity of in the room with with the Ministry of Edinburgh. And another collaborative research between the in the room with the UCL and University of Kacamada is defining the opportunity for mobile health technology implementation in Indonesia. Also, we have the disease emergence and economic evaluation of arthritic landscape, USID in the room, University of Minnesota. And actually, this is very important activity because we have a collaboration also with the local university and local province. Another is fostering health security and also the initial combat antimicrobial initiative and One Health Laboratory networking. This is some of the activity. Actually, also we have activity that supported by the APT2 One Health workforce. Is several different kind of activity like One Health diplomacy and also other activity related with the disease management, integrated training, and also we try to also integrate the FATP for human and FATP for the animal. Actually there are so many activities that I cannot explain. I cannot say it now because of the time. For the childhood infection and pollution CHIP study, I think I will invite Dewi to explain because she is the principal investigator for this project in Indonesia. Please. Time is yours.
For the introduction by Iqbal, and then now we will invite Dr. Dewi Nur Aisyah to give the introduction about CHIP and also this event as well. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Professors, for the wonderful presentation. So I will continue the presentation just to introduce what is CHIP, because as already mentioned by Professor Agus, Internet has a lot of international research and project collaborations with a lot of respective international institutions around the globe. So one of it is by becoming a member of the CHIP consortium. What is CHIP? CHIP stands for Child Infections and Pollution Study. With the overarching aim is to reduce infections and antimicrobial resistant burden among children under 5 who are living in 3 urban slum area by addressing One Health determinants and co-produce behavior change and utilizing technology-enabled citizen science method. The beauty of this project is we try to address the problem of infections and antimicrobial resistance not only in using a singular aspect or singular sector, which is the human health sector, but combining the interventions from the perspective of human health, animal health, and environmental health sectors. So the CHIP consortium member, it consists of 11 respective institutions in 7 countries across 3 continents, who are included University College London, Assessor Global Health Consultant, Jawaharlal Nehru University, University of Kerala, Save the Children India, JAS, Hong Hong Kong University. In Indonesia, the collaborator is Interhood, Indonesia One Health University Network. We also have a collaborator in the US, which are Columbia University and Georgetown University. In Japan, we have a collaborator from the St. Luke International University, Tokyo. And in Thailand, we also have a collaborator from the United Nations Population Fund. So the beauty of this consortium, it really consists of interdisciplinary experts. In the UK-based team, the collaborators came from two respective institutions. The first one, the SSO Global Health Consultant, and the second one is University College London. In the UCL, as you can see, we have a lot of experts, not only in integrated child health, infectious disease epidemiology and inclusion health, but we also have some experts in the field of environmental engineering, environmental design and engineering, geographic information science, as well as we have Dr. Alistair Story, which is the University College London Hospital Founders and the clinical lead of the Pan-London Fine and Treat Services, which combine a lot of things. From this consortium, I learned that we know we want to address infections and AMR, antimicrobial resistance. But as you can see in this collaborator, we also involve people from the Faculty of Engineering, which is quite surprising, because I just realized that while we want to address a singular problem, let's say infections, it's not only caused by singular factors. It's not only from the perspective of human health, but also where to live, the design, the infrastructure of the houses, the design of the houses, it will also affect the health of the people who live in the house. So in this consortium, I really learned that to address a problem, we really need to work together. This is our collaborator in India. In India-based team, we have Save the Children, which is the NGO in India who have been working with a lot of projects, engaging the community champions in the local community. We also have an expert in veterinary public health, and we also have Dr. Kaushik Sharkar as the India technical lead for Malaria No More. In Thailand-based team, we have Dr. Rintala Mori as regional advisor for populations aging and sustainable development. And in Hong Kong, we have Professor Keiji Fukuda, which is the director and clinical professor in public health. He is the one who mentions and raising the issues of antimicrobial resistance used in the UN Assembly. So why we are now very focusing in AMR, because we have Professor Keiji Fukuda. He is the one who raising the awareness of the people about the threat of the antimicrobial resistance around the world. We also have Dr. Heng Chun, which is the associate professor in veterinary public health. He has an expertise in doing metagenomics, microbiome analysis, whole genome sequencing, bioinformatics, and so on. We also have the intervener here, who is already explained by Professor Agus, which has a university network across 20 universities, 34 faculties across Indonesia, from Aceh to Papua. In Japan, we have a collaborator from the St. Luke International University, Tokyo. And in the US, we have our guest in here, Professor Tam Faktoriyeva from Columbia University, as well as Dr. Rebecca Pat from Georgetown University. So this is the timeline, what has Achieve Consortia doing. We met the first workshop at Jaipur, India, which was on May 2019. And after that, we have a feasibility study, and the result of the study will be explained by Yasmin and Yisrael. They have already conducted the slum visit and feasibility study in India in September 2019, and continued in Indonesia on October 2019, and then in Chile, which was on December 2019. And last week, we just had our second workshop in Jakarta, hosted by Interhood. And in this workshop, we have already discussed about the result of the feasibility study that will be conveyed during your presentations. And we will discuss what we will need to do to moving forward with the consortium. Before I close my presentation, this is a short one, I just want to quote one of the art proverb, which is, "He who has help has hope, and he who has hope has everything." And last, I would like to emphasize one of the value of Interhood and One Health, which highlights the importance of communications, coordinations, and collaborations across institutions, across disciplines, and across sectors. So I would like to say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, let's go together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for Dr. David Aisha for your wonderful presentation to the introduction of the chip and also the Global One Health to all the participants. I do believe all the participants will have a better understanding about the One Health itself and maybe also will be interested with the chip, what they do with the chip and other things. Therefore, we jump to the main section of this studium generale, that is the session with our speakers. But before that, I will inform all the audience here and also the webinar to write down your question and give it to the discussion session because we will have the presentation until the end that you can give it in the discussion session. And the first speakers will be Yasmin Purwani, MPH, and Isabel Pu, PhD. But before that, we will going to see the institution first with this video.
Really into public outreach that UCL has 3 research you can go into. So a big thing UCL is based on is the fact that they believe anyone should go to university. That was a big thing that I identified with. I'm the first in my family to go to university, so they're really proud of me. I know a lot of doubts people have is financial, that was a big one of mine. But if you actually look into how the student finance system works and how bursaries and loans and grants work, anyone can afford to go to university.
There's still times when I'm sitting in the lab and I think it's amazing that I've come from a high school chemistry set with realistically working with analytical ultrasensitivity down here.
After visiting UCL, I realised if I did go to UCL, I didn't want to go anywhere.
I think staying here gives you the opportunity to find out what you have to do and gives you the skills and the tools to do it.
Okay, that's the institution from our first speakers, Yasmin Purwani, MPH, and Isabel Pu, PhD. And they are also for Yasmin Purwani, MPH, is a senior research associate in Access of Global Health Consultant Limited and also in University College London. And also the Isabel Pu, PhD, is a research associate in Access of Global Health Consultant Limited in University College London, UK. And for your information, in the world, UCL and Columbia University, also with ASESOL, are part of Childhood Infection and Pollution or CHIP consortium with other respective global organizations. And our first speaker will present a topic about community mapping and engagement to co-create One Health Under 5 infection in urban slum conceptual diagram for the Childhood Infection and Pollution or CHIP consortium. Without any further ado, let's help you welcome Yasmin Purwani, MPH, and Isabel Pu, PhD.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. There's a lot of you here today. Okay, so first of all, before we start, I just want to thank everybody for being here. I do want to thank everybody who's been helping us. So Indoboon has been super supportive, very helpful. The University of Indonesia and the Public Health Department and Indonesian Public Health Association. Thank you very much. Thank you to Jakarta, everybody. This country is great. We've been having an amazing time here. So thank you very much for being here today. So we're just going to build a little on what Louis has said to you. We're just going to give you a little bit like an overview of what we've done so far, which is our feasibility study for CHIP. So I will give you a little bit of background info, and then Isabel is going to then cover the methodology that we've used so far, and then you can ask questions afterwards. So anyway, so my name is Yasmin Purwani. This is Isabel Pu, and our background is in public health. Mine specifically is in global health. Isabel's focused on epidemiology. So we've been working on CHIP for about a year or so. And we also do consultants in public health back in London. So that's our background. Who's talking? I don't think. Oh, perfect. study is to focus on especially infectious diseases. It is a massive problem worldwide. It's there are different reasons why we have that problem, and we're trying to address that and work on that. I will later show you a map that will kind of show you a little bit more about what we're trying to do. But what we're doing here with CHIP is, so what we do want to do here is, the two main goals of the two main strategies that we're going for is One Health and citizen science. And the reason we're going for it is and the reason we're going for it is because we want to cover a lot of different aspects of the problem. You can cover one aspect, you can cover just the human factor, but that might not be enough to tackle the entire problem, which is infectious diseases and AMR, which is what David was talking about earlier. And the citizen science approach, the reason we want to use it is because we can have all the knowledge in the world. We can develop whatever strategy we want. But if you go to a community and you just introduce your ideas and you try to just tell them, this is what we've got, this is what we think you should be doing, but it's not culturally sensitive, it's not relevant to that community, then there's no point, right? So you can have the best program in the world, but it has to be feasible, it has to be applicable to that reality, to that population, and because of that, we want so everything that we do, we have the input of the community, from the community. So we work closely with Indochina, for example, because they know the community. We come from different parts of the world, we don't know the reality of Jakarta as much, and even Indochina, we don't know the reality of each community. So one of the things that we're going to talk about later is our involvement and partnership with community champions. So far we've visited a couple communities in Jakarta, which I don't know if you know, one is Koja in North Jakarta, and then the other one is Kampung in East Jakarta. So we work with a lot of local people. We talk to community leaders, community members, and that's kind of what we want to do. That's the point of our study, is to work together with the people in each one of the communities that we go to, not only in Indonesia, but everywhere else, and try to develop a program together. Policymakers as well, and scientists, which would be us. So it is a global, it is a very universal type approach and very holistic. So yeah, so this, can you actually see this? Can you see? So we don't need to know all the details that are on there. I'm not going to cover every little bubble, but what I do want to say about this, so this is kind of just an overview of everything that we're trying to tackle. Obviously, it's a very detailed map. This is called a conceptual map. I don't know if you're familiar with conceptual maps, but what this is because our study is trying to look at different aspects of different populations to try and address infections, especially zoonosis, which is the transfer of infections between humans and animals. And obviously, consequently, we're also looking at AMR. We want to try and cover a lot of different bases here. We want to look into different risk factors in each community, and we want to look at the pathway of infection. Now, I don't think you can see it clearly, but we have here the different domains. We have animals, we have humans, and we have the environment. So if you look at, for example, animals, you see just, for example, use of antibiotics in animals. Obviously, the categories are a bit dynamic. You can actually, it's quite fluid, so you can put different bubbles under different domains. But what we want is to address, so each bubble is a risk factor. And they're related to different, do you know what SDGs are, the Sustainable Development Goals? So we're trying to tackle that. We're trying to match that back to those goals, and we're trying to make sure that it is a very, encompassing approach. So anyway, so the center of our study, which is quality of life, mortality in children under 5, as well as AMR. So each one of the bubbles is connected to a different one, and eventually it'll get to the center, which is what we're trying to address. We're not going to go through that, but it's just so that you can have an idea of how complex it is, and why just addressing one aspect of it is not enough. Because if I focus on the human domain, then there's all the other ones, and that's not enough to, address all the problems that we've been having. So just an example, for example, TB in 2016, we had almost 500,000 cases in the world of multi-drug resistance. So 500,000 cases is a lot. And those are just, tuberculosis that's resistant to it was actually the third wave of antibiotics that they've been using for TB, but that's just one example. And tuberculosis is actually one of the leading causes of mortality in children under 5. And that's not uncommon. You have malaria, you have diarrhea. We have over 2,000 children dying every day from diarrhea, and those numbers are very alarming. And actually, you can skip that one, because I'll go. Yeah, go ahead. Perfect. I don't think you guys want to see that again. So anyway, so I'm just going to tell a little bit why we did India, Indonesia, and Chile, which are the 3 countries that we're covering in our study. So the first country is India, and if you can see that, I don't think you can, but I'll tell you what it is. So under 5 mortality in India is almost 40 children per 1,000 living kids. So that's a lot, almost 40 children. And then you actually look at the population of India, and that's over 1 billion people. So if you actually do the math, it adds up to a lot of kids. And if you actually look at pneumonia, which is one of the leading causes of mortality in children under 5, it's 73% of children are at risk of developing pneumonia. So that's a lot. That's a very alarming number. So thank you. So Indonesia, actually, you guys know, over 250 million people, a very large country. We have a similar-ish situation where you have over 25 children under 5 per 1,000 dying as mortality. And you have around 75% of children at risk of developing pneumonia. So that's also a very alarming number. Now, obviously, the proportion is very different. We have 250 million versus 1 billion people in India. And then the other country that we have, which is even more different, is Chile. And Chile is in South America. I don't know who's familiar with Chile. And it's a completely different reality. Not only is it a much smaller country, but the rates of infection and the rates of mortality in children under 5 are much lower. Now, that is one of the reasons why we chose Chile, because it is a great contrast to everything else that we're looking at. So the point of choosing these 3 countries was, one, obviously we needed partners in these countries. As I said earlier, we can't just come in alone and try to do whatever we think is appropriate or we think is great or helpful. We obviously need the support of the community and the people. But also, we wanted to do a comparison. We wanted to have 3 different countries, hopefully in the future more, we'll see how that goes, that have different realities. And you want to be able to then contrast that and look at it, look at the numbers, look at the risk factors and see what's going on, to have a global sort of picture. So that's one of the reasons we chose those 3 countries. Now, it's okay, you can look back to before Isabel explains to you what we've done so far, I just want to give you I just want to tell you what we're going to actually be discussing now, which is the first phase of our study. So after we looked at all those things, we identified partners, we looked at the problem, we tried to make a decision on what we kind of wanted to address at first. We found our partners in different countries, universities and collaborators. And I don't know if you're very familiar with field research or just research. I mean, in Daegu, in the University of Indonesia, you do a lot of research. So what we did before we started a massive project, before you go in with thousands of different things that you want to do and have all this idea of what you think is appropriate or is going to work out, we tried to do a feasibility study. And what it is pretty much what it says. It's trying to address the feasibility of what we want to do in the future, basically. Which is one of the, we don't need to go back, but one of the questions that we had up there earlier is our study feasible? Can we actually come to Indonesia, for example, and do the data collection that we want? The data collection that's actually relevant to our project, relevant to our study. So we come into the community, we talk to people. Isabel's going to give you a little bit of a background on that and an overview of what we've done. But it's basically so that we know that when we come back in, that it might actually work, that there is a chance it's possible to work on that. We don't want to spend hours and hours on it working on it, developing something, spending money, spending resources, and then come in only to realize, actually, this is nothing that the people want. This is not at all what they've been hoping for or expecting. So we ran this study. We were actually just finished in December in Chile. It's about actually Korean the data collection in Jaipur in India. I did Indonesia, my second time here. Beautiful country, love it. And then Chile in December. So that was just what Isabel's going to explain what we've done and why that's important, and then we'll wrap it up pretty soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. So, as Yasmin has explained, we have identified organizations and institutions. We also identified community champions. So community champions are the residents of the community who are like a bridge between our consortium and the community. So first day, we conducted a workshop to explain what CHIP is about and why we want to do this and how their role is so valuable to our consortium. So this is one of the pictures from the workshop. So we kind of learned about what their idea of CHIP was, what of the tasks we were going to do in the field work, and we also had a revision session after all the transit walk and social mapping, as well as interviews. So transit walks. To understand the infection pathways and how the community looked like, we have conducted a walk and walked along all the areas in the community, small alleyways, all the places that local might hang out with children and everything. So we kind of looked into different parts of the slums, and some of them have kindly allowed us to have a look at their houses as well. And then social mapping was to learn about not just the geographical aspects of the community, but also the socio-demographic aspects of the community. We have conducted a social mapping done by the community members to learn about what different households are in the community, as well as what kind of animals they might have, or what kind of health facilities. Is there a pharmacy around, hospitals around? If there isn't, how far it is? We have acknowledged all the information that are vital for our study. So yeah, that's some of the pictures of how the community members have helped us mapping by the local materials like beans, chalk, leaves, and peas and everything, which were fabulous and colourful, and they were so helpful at letting us know if there was any chickens, cows, pigs, dogs who live in those each houses. Lastly, we have conducted a total of 20 interviews or more, so 20 for Chile and 40 for Jaipur and Jakarta. A mix of the caregivers of the under 5 children, as well as the key informants of the community, including religious leaders, policymakers, perhaps doctors, teachers in the community, to learn about the visibility of our protocol for the next stage of CHIP. We have asked about the sampling procedures that we would like to conduct in the stage 2 of our project, which are stool samples, nasal, throat, hair, air quality of the indoor household, water quality of different usage of water, like drinking water, laundry, or washing, milk sample, not just including just milk that they drink from the shop, but also milk that they might collect from the livestock animals that they live in the house. As well as larval sample from the water they might drink or use as a wash, and blood sample and urine sample, which are going to be talked a bit further more from the next speech from Professor Pam. Back to you, Pat. Now, Yasmin's going to talk about the findings of our Stage 1 feasibility study, and I'll pass it on to her.
Oh, perfect. I did manage to like look at it. Apparently I'm not very good at it. So just going back to what Isabel was saying. So this is some of the numbers that we found in all 3 countries. So that we combined all 3 of them. And as you can see, these numbers you can see, right? Is it dark enough? It all looks very positive. You come in and you talk to the people. We talked about, so we did 40 interviews in India, 40 interviews here, 22 interviews in Chile. We try to be as consistent as possible, right? We did 40 here, 40 in India, and we tried to do as many as possible in Chile. But obviously, which is one of the things that we need to point out here, is that sometimes, because you depend and you're reliant on people's availability and their time, it doesn't always pan out. You don't always show up and everything works the way you've planned. And here, it's good to mention this here. Going to communities in each of the 3 countries, every parent, all parents, which in this case were majority members in all 3 countries actually. They were very positive about it. The thing we heard the most was parents and mothers saying, as long as it's for the good of our children, it's for their good health, we'll do whatever you need. Which is great. It sounds great, and it is a beautiful sentiment. It's beautiful that people are willing to, do things that aren't pleasant. Taking blood and stool sample. Those aren't very pleasant to do. But they're willing to do it for the community, they're willing to do it for their children. But the one thing we need to keep in mind is whatever plan we have, anything we have on paper, it could be the most elaborate plan, we're taking everything into account, everything's planned for, everything's accounted for. But when you come into the field, and I don't know how many of you have actually done field work before, it's a completely different story. The numbers here look very high. But it doesn't actually mean that when we come back, we're actually going to get 100% of milk samples, for example. Or if we're not getting hair samples, it doesn't mean that we're going to get 100% of them. And the reason for it is me coming in with a piece of paper and asking them, are you willing to do this, is one thing. Me coming in with an entourage, 30 people coming in, obviously we're not going to be 30 people, but, bringing in a bunch of other people, having all the equipment for sample collection, it's a different story. So those are all things, obviously, that we, when develop the next protocol and the protocol for the next phase of the study, we have to take all that into account. And that's a very important part of research, is knowing that what you have on paper doesn't have to necessarily apply during, field collection and field work. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Great. So actually, this picture is great. This picture is graffiti in Chile, actually. And this goes back to what we were saying earlier about taking culture into account and taking people's beliefs and knowledge and all of that and experiences into account. But anyway, so what I do want to say, I want to just, before we wrap it up, I know we need to wrap it up. I just want to say, I want to tell you why we want to do all those 3 different steps. Why do we do that? How are they connected? What is the point of doing all 3 steps? So this is an example. This is from Chile, actually. So what I want to show you here is, so this is one of the communities that we visited in Chile, actually. And what I am showing you here is, so this map was, they had already done that. We didn't, unfortunately, we didn't put together this beautiful map. Maybe in the future we will. But this was already in the community. So we took that picture because what we wanted to do is the whole point of doing what Isabel was telling you about earlier, the social mapping, is so that we can get an idea of what's going on in the community. So when we do the transit walks, you walk around, let's assume this is an alleyway, we're walking down the alleyway, there's 2, 3 of us, we're taking notes, we're taking pictures, and for us, we're looking for something specific. We're looking for example, sources of water. And we know what we're looking for. The people who are guiding us might not necessarily know what we're doing in terms of what exactly we want. So we take pictures, we note it down, and when we go back to the community center or wherever it is that we do the social mapping at, we draw the map with them. So, do you mind? Thank you. So this, I just kind of zoomed in on the areas in those maps. So for example, this is one of the maps the community leaders in Chile drew for us. So they said, okay, this is the map of our community. This is what we have here. Those are the houses that we are responsible for, and so on and so forth. And what they did was, we asked them questions. So, okay, which houses are you responsible for? They tell us, which in this case were all the red ones, for this particular community leader. And we asked them, okay, do you know how many under 5 children live there? Do you know how many pets they have? Do you know, we asked a bunch of questions because we want to try to learn as much about the community as possible, even though it's feasibility, because that's the point, right? The point is knowing as much as we can about it before we come back. So anyway, so that's one of the examples, and that's something that they drew. But what we want to do, so we only got to this point here after we've done the transect walks, right? So we had a little bit more knowledge about it. We knew kind of what we were looking for, what we wanted to ask them about. And then what we did, so this is, again, a map that they already had, and we sort of tried to put some dots on there so that you can see kind of like in a more legible, sort of like easier to see map what we're doing. Do you want to go back just one, please? Thank you. So the point of doing all of this, and obviously I'm not, these are very simplistic, I'm not giving all the details, so you can ask about that later. But the point of doing all of that is so that eventually, now that we're going to analyze all the data that we've collected, we want to get to a point where we have this. So this, we didn't put it together. This was already, the government of Chile at the time had already put it together. They had already gone through the community and done a similar type of work. Obviously, they were trying to achieve different goals. It wasn't, they were looking at, child mortality and infection. It was for a different purpose. So what they did here was they had the entire map of the community. They mapped that out. They had all the houses. And then if you can see all the different dots, so you have some blue ones, you have some yellow ones, and I'm sure you can see that. And what those represent, they represent different characteristics of the house. They were tackling something specific, they knew what they wanted, and that's what we want to do. We want to do something similar, where we sort of like superimpose everything on each, so we have all the different data, and we create a map with a lot of information about the community. We want to know, for example, if the main water source of the community is based here, for example, if this where it sits, what is it? Is it a river? Is it a well? So we're just trying to get a good idea what's going on for when we come back and do further data collection. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's it, I think. And so that's actually a picture of, obviously we took it here back in December. Those 3 ladies that were our community champions, they allowed us to post this picture, by the way. And this is Hemant. Hemant is, well, that's me, beautiful, beautiful picture. Terrible. And Hemant is he's the other person who helped us out. He did a similar job to Ian and Isabel. He did the work here, and he did the work in India. He is very well trained in field work, so we had his support. I do want to say, before you get into questions and all that, I do want to thank again Cynthia, who's over here, who has helped us, identify community champions and communities. Dewey, again, who's been incredible, supported us alongside Cynthia and all the new team, who's been amazing to us and helped us get to this point. And hopefully, when we come back, we'll work together again. And everybody, in Indonesia, have already thanked the people in the communities. But again, I want to bring that up to you guys. It's been great to be able to work here. We look forward to coming back soon. And yeah, you guys can ask any questions you have. Thank you.
Yes, maybe all the audience want to give a question, but you must give your question in the discussion session because we will invite the next speakers.
Perfect. Sorry about that. I should have asked first. Anyway, thank you so much.
Yeah. second speaker will be our Professor Pang. And then before that, you're going to also see the video from the installation of Professor Pang. So that's the video.
Public health encompasses so many different aspects, from sociology to anthropology to any ology you can think of, really. We tend to think that biomedical factors are the most influential drivers of health outcomes, but the non-biomedical factors, where you live, what kind of nutrition you're getting, racism, sexism, these are just as consequential, sometimes even more consequential.
The air that we breathe, the water that we drink, and the food that we eat, making sure that those are as clean, as healthy as possible.
We are all driven by the same goal.
We're much more about big picture fixing than we are just treating an individual.
It really is about building a healthy and just world.
One of the real privileges of public health is that you get to actually act on your passion. People are here because they care deeply about social justice and bringing science to the public good.
Yes, our next speakers come from Columbia University, and she is a professor of epidemiology and vice chair of research in the Department of Epidemiology and associate dean of research resources, Columbia University. And her current research interests concern the biological relationship between environmental exposure development, and she is particularly interested in utero and early childhood exposure to heavy metal, and endocrine disrupting compound, and also developmental reproductive outcome in late childhood, adolescent, and adulthood. Okay, and she will deliver a topic about early life environmental exposure and child development. Okay, for Professor from Academic Class, the time is yours.
So, thank you very much for that very kind introduction, and I want to thank everybody here today, especially Dr. Assis Saratorini, who I know had to leave, Professor Angus Suwandano, thank you for being here, Dr. Dewey Nora Asia, who I've collaborated with over the past year, representatives of the Indonesian Public Health Association, and the Global Health Lecturers and Faculty of Public Health at the University of Indonesia, and of course all the students and other faculty members who are here today. Thank you very much. I've had a very interesting and productive 2 weeks stay in your beautiful country. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the research I've done over my 35-year career in public health, and in particular studying environmental epidemiology. I am very passionate about early life exposures in children, and they begin in pregnancy. They even begin before pregnancy because conditions of the mother, even before she becomes pregnant, are very important for the health of her child throughout the child's life. So I'm going to give a bit of an introduction and then talk about two of the studies that I've been very involved in. One is a study that looked at prenatal and postnatal lead exposure in Kosovo. At the time we did this study, Kosovo was part of Yugoslavia, the larger country of Yugoslavia. And the second study is a study that we've been conducting in New York City for the past 20 years, where we have a cohort of inner city youth. We've had them before they were born, actually, and they're reaching 20 years old. But we've measured a new kind of environmental chemical from plastics. And we looked at their health effects into early adolescence at this point. So this is a picture of the outside of the Melbourne School of Public Health. And, okay, a life course approach to the study of environmental exposures in childhood health from pregnancy and beyond. So I wanted to show this first slide. This is a slide showing the very early stages of development. And so this is a picture of a baby. This is at fertilization. It's not drawn to scale, but this is the one-cell organism that happens at the time of conception. And these are the very early stages of embryonic development. And at day approximately 60, the second month of pregnancy, the end of the second month, this is what the embryo looks like. The embryo is about to become a fetus. So development in this early part of pregnancy, when many women do not even know that they're pregnant, is incredibly important. And it's incredibly important to identify environmental, and I'll include nutritional factors, at that very early stage of pregnancy, even while the woman is trying to become pregnancy, and to look at the environment that she lives in, because these exposures pass through the placenta, as I'll show in a minute, and actually affect the fetus. Just to give you an idea of the timing, because timing is very important here. So human pregnancy lasts approximately 9 months. For sort of ease of interpretation, researchers and physicians break it up into 3 trimesters of equal time length. The first trimester, the first 3 months or so, is the embryonic period, and then the fetal period. Okay, and we can move on, because this is the more important figure. So as you see, during the very early embryonic period, the first thing that begins to develop is the brain. And many of the nutritional exposures, many environmental exposures affect the brain, as I'll show you in a little while. So this is a crucial period of development: the heart, the limbs, the ear, the teeth. And so when you look at exposure during pregnancy, it actually is very nice if you start measuring exposures at the early part of pregnancy, or even in the preconception period. That's very hard to do. I have a former PhD student of mine is setting up a cohort right now looking at the preconception time of pregnancy and following women until they become pregnant, getting measures of their blood and their urine to measure environmental exposures later on. Very hard to do. It's very intensive for the participants, but actually very, very important work. Just to show you that the brain also develops through the 9 months. This is the very beginning of development of the development of the neural tube, which closes around the first 14 days of pregnancy. Very important period of time for development, and then the full brain doesn't fully develop until the baby is born, and even beyond, because the child brain and the adolescent brain continues to develop until into adolescence and even into adulthood. Okay, so what is this environment that the baby is in, the intrauterine environment? There was a book that was published probably about, 7 years ago. And I remember hearing about it driving home from work one Friday evening. I heard it on the radio and I said, wow, they had an interview with the journalist who wrote the book, Annie Murphy Paul. And I said, wow, this is sort of like the work I do. I need to get this book, I need to read it. I got home, I ordered it from Amazon. It was delivered the next day. I stayed up all night reading it, and I found out that it wasn't very good. It was not a very good job. And why wasn't it a good job? It was because, yes, she did speak about pregnancy and exposures and conditions during pregnancy that could affect babies' health. But she ended up saying that that was it. At the end of pregnancy, it's over. You can't change anything. The point is you can change things. Certain things you can change, few things you can't, but you can intervene even after pregnancy And that was the point that you missed. And you know, with our work on the CHIP Consortium and the first 5 years of life, we hope to take interventions that are from a One Health perspective and put them into childhood as well, to try and prevent some of the harmful effects of poor nutrition, of environmental exposures, of infections in early life. So really looking at just pregnancy is not appropriate, and you need to consider the entire lifespan of exposures that a person has. And there's a word for it now, it's called the exposome. And it's really taking all of the exposures throughout your life and trying to integrate them, much like we do in One Health, into a conceptual framework that allows you to study development over the entire life course and even into aging. It was covered in Time magazine, which is a popular weekly news magazine in the United States. Sorry. Okay. So, here if you look at the maternal environment. What goes into the maternal environment? Many things, okay? There's nutrition, stress, things like smoking behavior, the mother's illness, as well as other environmental exposures. And the maternal environment actually interacts with the placenta, that sort of bridge between the mother and the baby, and can affect the function of the placenta. For example, we do know that amongst women who smoke while they're pregnant, there's decreased vascularization of the placenta, so not enough blood, perhaps, gets to the fetus, not enough nutrients through the maternal child transfer. Babies are born small, approximately 200 to 400 grams, smaller in women who smoke than women who don't smoke. And we always use smoking as the benchmark for looking at changes in fetal weight. And so the fetal environment is the amniotic fluid that the baby is laying in during the course of pregnancy. And changes in that amniotic fluid also, the baby is swallowing the amniotic fluid, excreting things into the amniotic fluid. So changes in the composition of the amniotic fluid are also quite important for child development. And of course, then you get into the postnatal part and the adult phenotypes. This is just, and I apologize, it's rather small, this slide. This is just a summary of a meta-analysis that was published in 2011 that looked at maternal smoking during pregnancy and birth defects. And I want to just use it to illustrate that, and let me just take you through it. These are the various types of birth defects. On the bottom is the combined estimate for all birth defects. And here are the estimated odds ratios from a meta-analysis looking at maternal smoking in each of the birth defects. So it's almost like a super meta-analysis. And so here are the odds ratios. You can see that they're above the null value, which is 1, for some of the cardiovascular ones, some of the facial ones, some gastrointestinal ones, but below 1, for example, for skin defects. That was only based on one study. And the message here is that if you just combined all of the birth defects, you would say that maternal smoking has no association with birth defects. And in reality, it does, because the beauty of this slide is to look at the birth defects individually. And yes, there's an association with some, but not an association with others. So the point is sort of to split it out and to look at the important factors. Similarly, this is a systematic review and meta-analysis which looks at maternal smoking during pregnancy and childhood obesity. And once again, these are individual studies. Over here, these are the odds ratios. The null value is right over here. And the size of the point estimate is in relationship to the sample size of each particular study. This is called a forest plot. And so you can see that there's variable associations for the studies, but when you do combine them, the odds ratio is about 2 here, indicating that looking at all of the evidence together and adjusting for the sample sizes of the individual study, there's still about a doubling of the risk of a child being obese if mothers smoke during pregnancy. So I just wanted to use those 2 examples to sort of introduce some of the work I'm going to talk to now that has about brain development, which could be influenced by environmental toxins, which is the work that I've been involved in. And the first study I'm going to talk about is misnamed because we still call it Yugoslavia. The Yugoslavia study of lead exposure, pregnancy outcomes, and child development. It's really took place in Kosovo. When we started, it was prior to 1999 when the breakup of Yugoslavia occurred. And I want to acknowledge my co-investigators there, Joe Graziano, who actually was the founder of the study, Gail Wasserman, the developmental psychologist who worked with us, myself, and many, many other people, both from Columbia University and from the University of Pristina and the health center in Mitrovica, where the smelter was located. So lead poisoning remains a large problem for children and in fact for adults as well. Lead exposure is associated with effects on the childhood brain, behavior problems, lower measures of intelligence, hearing loss, learning disabilities, decreased bone and muscle growth, and we think also stunting as well. Damage to the kidneys, iron deficiency anemia, and damage to the nervous system, and has other effects in adults who are highly exposed to lead. Our study took place in 2 towns in Kosovo, in Yugoslavia. Mitrovica, over here, is directly adjacent to the Trepča mining community. Trepča was the site of the largest lead smelting mine battery factory in Europe at the time of our study. It has since closed. And Pristina was the capital of Kosovo, it still is, the capital of Kosovo, about 25 kilometers to the south. And this is a picture when Dr. Graziano first visited Kosovo in 1983. The smelter, this is the smelter complex. You can see the smoke coming out of the chimneys, and this is the area where people lived. He was invited there by the World Bank. He's a toxicologist. He was invited there by the World Bank to advise them on blood lead concentrations in the community residents of Kosovo. And he found that blood leads were, this is among adults, they were highly elevated. The mean blood lead concentration was above 30 micrograms per deciliter, which was the upper limit in the US at the time. So here it was very, very high. And the World Bank then went and did some repairs of these chimneys. They made them higher. And they built new housing, but they built it directly downwind of the smelter, which meant it actually had a very important research implication, because it meant that children from better social circumstances were more highly exposed, which was the opposite of what we found in US studies, where children from lower social circumstances were more highly exposed. So as an epidemiologist, it was very, very important to control for social circumstances in all of our analyses, because otherwise we would not find an association. So this is a picture, another picture once with the new chimney, which was much taller. So what did we find? In this study we found, this is the blood lead concentrations. We followed the children until they were 12 and a half. And at age 12 and a half, we were actually in Kosovo doing bone lead measurements at the time when the NATO planes were flying overhead. So we did our measurements and we left, and unfortunately there was a civil war at that point, and we couldn't go back to find the children afterwards because they had scattered. So here are the blood lead concentrations. This is, the black dots are the unexposed pound, and the blue dots are the exposed pound. So children were born with blood lead concentrations of an average of 20 micrograms per deciliter. At that point in the US, when we published this paper, the CDC standard for elevated blood lead concentrations was 10 micrograms per deciliter. It had come down from 25. So here it was 10. These children were being born at 20. By age 2, this is, and you can see it in the control town also, this is the prime time where children exhibit hand-to-mouth behavior. And that's why you see an increase in the blood lead concentrations. Lead doesn't go anywhere. It settles from the dust. It settles to the ground. Children are constantly doing this, either with toys or with their hands, and they're having more lead exposure at that time. Blood lead represents exposure over roughly the last 30 days or so, but it also represents an equilibrium between lead and the bone. Lead has a half-life in the body of about 20 years because it sequesters in the bone. And it develops an equilibrium between bone lead and blood lead. So if you were exposed earlier in childhood, as I'll show you in the next slide, you're going to, and the exposure ceases, you're still going to have higher blood leads than a control group would. But let me just point out a few more things here. So this is the blood lead curve. This is erythrocyte protoporphyrin, which is part of an enzyme in the red blood cells. Actually, it's hemoglobin without the one of the ions that's necessary. And you can also see the elevations there parallel to the blood lead, which is to be expected at high levels of lead exposure. Here you see serum ferritin and hemoglobin showing the very expected dip in hemoglobin as the child transitions from fetal hemoglobin concentrations to their own. They become physiologically anemic at about age 1 to age 2, and then their hemoglobin comes back up, okay? So we left Yugoslavia in about 2000. We've been analyzing data, and we have stored samples from this study in our biorepository. So we've been constantly writing new proposals to analyze new things. I'll show you in a minute. But I had a very industrious doctoral student several years ago who was from the area. And he said, oh, I really want to go back. I'm going to fund this myself. I'm going to see if I can find some of the original cohort to see what's happened to them. So he did. He went back. He found 100 children, mostly 100 former children. Now they were about 25 years old. And he was able to get them to participate in an abbreviated study. What he did was he took a blood sample and he took their blood pressure, and that was it. We had published papers on elevations in child blood pressure due to lead exposure. He was interested to see what happened afterwards. But I'm showing this slide because this is the blood lead concentration. This is what I showed you before. This is the blood lead concentration at age 25. In the intervening period, the smelter had closed, so high levels of exposure had ceased in the area. But because of this blood-bone equilibrium, the exposed children who grew up in the exposed town still had higher blood lead concentrations than those who didn't live in the exposed town. So the lesson to be learned here is that learning, if you're studying environmental agents or even infections, knowing the half-life and what happens to the chemicals or the virus in the body after the acute exposure ceases is incredibly important to learn how exposure can affect you later on in life. These are our results at the age 7 assessment of children, where we looked at IQ score, and I'm not going to explain what's on the axes, other to say that this is sort of a measure of IQ score from low to high, and this is an integrated average of the exposure that the children had from the in-utero period to age 7, and we saw this very decline in IQ scores related to blood lead concentrations, even at the lower exposure levels. And in fact, working in a consortium with 7 other prospective studies of childhood lead exposure and IQ, we all got together and pooled our data in a very rare US cooperative effort. And I remember sitting at the meetings, and we were all very nice to each other and talking, and really decided that in order to get at the shape of the lead curve for children and to determine whether or not there is a, in big quotation marks, safe level of lead in children, we needed to pool the studies. We did. And in fact, the interesting part here, this is IQ and this is blood lead concentration. This happens to be blood lead concentration at the time the IQ is measured, but it didn't matter. When we looked at blood lead concentration, it was all the same. The steepest decline in IQ occurs at the lowest blood lead concentrations, highlighting the fact that even children with blood lead concentrations of 5 micrograms per deciliters could be affected on a population level with small decrements in IQ scores. And I will show you the importance of these small decrements right now. So if this is IQ scores, and IQ scores have a mean of 100 for standard IQ tests, and a standard deviation of approximately 15 depending on the population. The red curve represents a normal distribution of IQ that you would see in almost any country of the world. If you look at the blue line, this is a shift in the average IQ of about 5 points, which is what you see with a doubling of blood lead exposure in children. And so now you see that the mean is 95, but the proportion of individuals with IQs between 50 and 70 who are generally classified as moderately impaired increases between the red and the blue here. The yellow line represents a shift of 10 points below the mean, to the mean. So you can see that even these small declines in IQ scores have important ramifications on a population basis for public health professionals on the development of human capital and the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's very important not to say, well, 2 IQ points, big deal. It's for a child, for any individual child, yes, it's not so important, but for a population, it's very important. And that's why studying environmental exposures, even if they have small decreases, not only in IQ, but even in lung disease or in asthma, is incredibly important for public health professionals. And this I'm going to skip in the interest of time. So why does lead have the effect on childhood IQ? It's a question we want to answer. Because even if you still have lead exposure, you might be able to do something and to find some sort of treatment. So this is a slide from animal data where we do know that, that lead exposure is associated with increased pruning of neurons in the brain. But lead exposure is also associated with, in studies, and we provided some of that data, with thyroid dysfunction in pregnant women. And very important, actually. And it's because lead accumulates in an area of the brain called the choroid plexus, which is back here. And it's the site of where the production of cerebrospinal fluid. It's also responsible for the production of brain-specific transthyretin, which is the transport protein that takes thyroid hormone from the mother and brings it into the brain. Thyroid hormone, again, is very important for fetal brain development. So you want that to be working well. So animal data from one of my colleagues, Wei Zhen, suggested that lead inhibited production of TTR and reduced the amount of free thyroid hormone entering the brain of the fetus. And we were able to pull samples from our biorepository to test this hypothesis. And so maternal thyroid hormone during pregnancy actually provides all of the requirements for the fetus throughout pregnancy, because the fetal thyroid really doesn't produce enough thyroid hormone until very late in development. So maternal thyroid hormone production is key here. And as you can see, this is sort of how the brain develops over time. So it's very key, especially in early pregnancy. So one of my doctoral students, we took samples out of the freezer. We had them measured, the maternal samples for thyroid hormone. And we actually found, and I have it better on the next slide, that if we looked at mid-pregnancy blood lead of the mother, which we had, and we also had the thyroid hormone concentration of the mother, we found that there was this decline in free thyroxine, the thyroid hormone that's available to the fetus, with increasing blood lead concentrations. It actually was the very first time this was demonstrated. It was a very important finding. We also wanted to look at other measures of thyroid hormones that the mother might have tests on during pregnancy. Usually free thyroid hormone is not measured. They usually measured thyroid stimulating hormone. It's an easier, cheaper blood test to do, but if you measured that hormone, there was no relationship. So it was very specific to the free thyroid hormone. But it was also shed some light on a possible mechanism, and the mechanism being that with increasing blood lead concentrations in the mother, we saw an increase in anti-thyroid antibodies in the mother. And this has been replicated at least one time at this point. And it's very interesting because it shows that part of the mechanism for the thyroid damage and following up the children, and we're analyzing the child blood samples, might actually result in autoimmune thyroid disease in the mother and then the fetus and then the child afterwards. So it actually sheds a different kind of mechanistic interpretation, rather, a more interpretation that lead may actually be an endocrine disruptor and not just a neurotoxin. So it actually had a very important implication here. Okay. So I was then interested because we have submitted a grant application to do some preliminary work here in Yugoslavia, in Indonesia. And I was interested to see if there was any published literature on childhood lead exposure in Indonesia. And there's a very recent paper from investigators here at the University of Indonesia that looked at blood lead concentrations in children living near and distant from informal battery recycling communities in Jakarta. Okay? And the study, this is just the abstract from the paper. The study actually found, they studied 279 children, some of whom lived near these battery recycling centers and some who lived further away from the battery recycling centers. Now batteries are important, they have lead in them, they're lead batteries, especially the car batteries. They looked at a host of factors that could be associated with blood lead characteristics. They found that 47% of children had blood lead concentrations greater than 5 micrograms per deciliter, and that 9% had blood lead concentrations greater than 10 micrograms per deciliter. Just as a comparison, in the US and in most of Western European countries, the maximum limit for childhood lead concentrations is 3 micrograms per deciliter, and 95% of children have concentrations below 3 micrograms per deciliter in the US. So this really indicates that there still may be, at least in certain geographic areas in Indonesia, a problem with blood lead in children. I also want to say that it didn't matter if they live near or distant to the battery recycling locations, because lead just goes into the atmosphere, especially from burning, and may settle in areas away from where the actual burning takes place. So they did also in this study find what we would expect, that older children had higher blood leads. Children from lower social circumstances, lower household income, had higher blood leads. Lower educational attainment of the child's father had lower blood leads. And of course, if the children were outside more, they had higher blood lead concentrations as well. Okay, so this was the only English language study I could find that looked at blood lead concentrations in children in Indonesia, but really suggests that at least in these specific geographic areas, there still may be, lead exposure still may be a concern in Indonesia, and that would be part of the study that we have proposed to look at in the slum in Kojang, to look at the lead. And we did see them last week when I did take a walk around Kojang. I did see the burning of trash and I presume batteries as well. So I'll leave lead for now, and I'll talk just for a few minutes about an area of research that I think also would have great implications here in Indonesia, and it's study of phthalates and phthalates in child development. So phthalates are these chemicals, and these are just 5 commonly used phthalates. They're chemicals with these similar structures. 470 million pounds are produced or imported into the US every year. They're widely used in consumer products because they have very good properties. They're flexible, so they're used in plastic flooring, they're used in shower curtains, they're used to line cans of food, for example. They also have a property where they hold scents. They're very good at that. So they're found in scented soaps, in hand lotions, in perfume, in deodorants, and in other personal care products. Now in the US, they've been voluntarily taken out of some of these products, but they're being replaced by similar compounds, but those compounds haven't been studied. And we researchers call them regrettable replacements, because we don't know the harmful effects of them yet. We're just starting to do studies on the replacement compounds now. So diet is the predominant route for one of these compounds, DHP and metabolites. Otherwise, they're inhaled or they're absorbed through the skin. They actually are rapidly metabolized. They're rapidly metabolized, and the half-life of these compounds, in contrast to lead, which stays around for 20 years or so, hours to days. But exposure is repeated because people don't change their habits. They don't change the products they're using. So you're repeatedly exposed, so even though they have relatively short half-lives, we've shown in some of our studies product use that your product use for women, for example, during pregnancy doesn't change. So product use is actually a good surrogate exposure marker if we don't have the biomarkers measured. And they're excreted in urine, so we have biorepositories in studies that I've set up in New York and in other places of the world of urine as well as blood. So when we started our work, there had been limited studies here. There had been a couple of studies in Korea, in the US, and in Mexico. that found various kinds of effects in children of mental development and motor development. Notably, these effects appear to be related both to the age of assessment of the function and to be sex specific. And so it's the sex specificity here that makes the most biological sense, because phthalates are endocrine disruptors. We know that they're anti-estrogenic, they bind to estrogen receptors, and some of them are anti-androgenic, they bind to androgen receptors. And it's interference with those hormones that actually cause some of the harmful effects. So here's just sort of an overview of some of the possible mechanisms that might be associated with phthalate exposure. So our study is actually a Europe cohort study of 328 African American and people of Dominican descent, mothers and children in northern Manhattan and the Bronx. And it's part of the Columbia Centers for Child Environmental Health that's jointly funded by the National Institutes of Health and by the Environmental Protection Agency. We enrolled these mothers during pregnancy between 1998 and 2006. We excluded by design women who were smokers, women who used illicit drugs, women with HIV, and women who had known hypertension or diabetes. We wanted a relatively healthy sample of women in this study. And this study has been used to look at many, many environmental exposures, including air pollution, heavy metals, lead, phthalates, phenols like BPA. Women were administered during pregnancy a questionnaire. We had access to their medical records. We had the women give urine samples in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, and it was those samples we measured the phthalate exposure. During childhood, at age 3, 5, 7, and actually now 11, 13, 15, 17, and the 19-year-old assessment is ongoing. We gave the child questionnaires. We have urine samples. I'm going to talk about phthalates at age 3, 5, and 7 here today as well. And at age 7, we gave the child a very standard IQ test, the Webster Intelligence Scales for Children. And among other tests, at age 11, for example, I'll talk about a motor test. The IQ test has a score of full-scale IQ, which is the one where you see I have an IQ of 120. That's full-scale IQ. But it also has subtests for verbal, perceptual reasoning, working memory, and processing speed. And if you recall what I said earlier, it might be these subtests where an environmental exposure has the most impact, not on the whole, but on specific functions in children. We always control for a wide variety of other variables in our studies in terms of actually isolating the effect of what we're interested in. This is just the variables that we've controlled for here. And just to give you a little bit of background about our population, we work in Upper Manhattan and the South Bronx here. This is a map of New York City, and it shows areas of New York City that are below the percent of people below the federal poverty line. So our population up here, and each woman is represented by a blue dot, is in an area that's socioeconomically deprived. So this wouldn't be comparable to one of the peri-urban slums that we've been studying in CHIP, but these are women who are socially disadvantaged. And in fact, you can see that the mothers have IQs, we've measured them, of about 85, which is 1 standard deviation below the population mean. They also, the 2/3 of them have never been married, they're single parents. A third of them have less than a high school education, less than education grade 12. And by design, they were either from Dominican heritage or African American. So this cohort was taken by design. This is what we want. We compared, when we measured phthalates in the maternal urine in the third trimester of pregnancy, we actually compared the measurements to a national sample of pregnant women from the NHANES study. There were 91 pregnant women in NHANES, and we found that for some of the phthalates, our women had higher exposures than the national average, but in others they had slightly lower exposures. We also were very concerned that because phthalates have a very short half-life, in a sample of 135 women, we actually, of 48 women, we had repeat samples over a 6-week period. And we measured how much change there was using something called the interclass correlation coefficient, which is a statistical measure that looks for exact agreement, not just correlation, but exact agreement. And we found, not too bad, that the majority of phthalates had interclass correlation coefficients over 0.6. Some of them had lower interclass correlation coefficients, but we also realized that these were spot urine samples. And so we might not have been getting representative numbers here, but we did try. I'll show you first what we didn't find. We didn't find associations between metabolites from DEP or DHP and any IQ measure, or between MBZP or the metabolite of DBZP and any H7 measure either. What we did find, and this is the results of regression, estimated regression coefficients, it's the first number, and the 95% confidence intervals here, controlling for a lot of variables. We found deficits in perceptual reasoning, processing speed, working memory, and verbal comprehension. And indeed, those associations were slightly different in boys and girls for full-scale IQ. And this is also, especially for the MNBP, which is more of an estrogen antagonist, we found a stronger association in girls. Just to show it visually a little bit, you could see that if you took the phthalate concentrations and you actually took the lowest 25% and then the second 25%, you can see the declines for these representative phthalates. I'm sorry, I guess I missed the actual ones. You can see that we did find these sort of dose-response relationships. And we found dose-response relationships similarly for many of the aspects of IQ, working memory, verbal comprehension, and specific phthalate metabolites. And so this harps on the case that, well, it's specific metabolites, it's specific functions of the brain. So that's very important, actually, when you want to know why. So we also hypothesized that that phthalates may be associated with thyroid dysfunction that had been shown in animal literature. So this is the work done by my master's student, an MPH student named Rachel Morgenstern. Actually, we took samples out of the freezer, we measured thyroid function in the children, and then we looked at the association between phthalates. And very surprisingly, we found that the associations between phthalates and thyroid function in the female children were specific to female children. We didn't find any associations in males. And thyroid function actually has some relationship to estrogen. And so we suspect that this is part of sort of an adverse effect of phthalates on estrogen. Similarly, we found this also, I apologize for the size of this slide. This is from a very recent publication where we actually then looked at the motor test function, fine motor and gross motor function, in these same children at age 11. and we looked at prenatal exposure to phthalates. And we found that the associations, you don't need to really look at them very seriously, but the red is girls, that these associations are predominantly found in girls, and in particular with fine motor function. So the effect on estrogen seems to be predominant in girls, and the harmful effects of phthalates may be stronger in girls. And now our cohort is coming up to reproductive age, and we'll be able to look at what happens to their pregnancy outcomes. We're trying to keep them interested in the study and in participating in the study. So I just want to show you one more important thing. These phthalates are in plastic. They're in plastic bottles. I've seen plastic in the peri-urban slums, both here in Jakarta and in Jaipur in India. So there's obviously exposure here, I would think. But the phthalates are very highly correlated with each other. This is called a heat map. And what it does is it looks at the interrelationship between these chemicals. You can see that the correlations between the chemicals are pretty much above the 0.5 level. So they're highly correlated, which means that when you find an association with one in particular chemical, it may be really due to another chemical. So an active area of research now in environmental biostatistics is the analysis of mixtures. And we've been working with several biostatisticians who have a method called weighted quantile sums, and it's a fancy equation. I'm not going to show you the equation. And what it does is it takes the outcome and it takes the exposures, it weights the exposures to the outcome, and it shows you which of the chemicals are really the bad actors in the association when you have a group of related chemicals. So we found when we looked at, I'm sorry, I'm doing something wrong, I think. When we look at it in females, for some of the metabolites of the thyroids, looks to see this is the chemical that has the strongest relationship. And these two, the purple ones, have lesser relationships with the fine motor outcome in girls. And you can see as we modeled it in the regression analysis, you can see the association here for both the fine motor functions. So I want to circle back around as I finish to this chart that shows really that timing of exposure is really key to everything. It's key to everything when we look at environmental exposures, whether they be to heavy metals, to chemical pollutants, to air pollution, even to infections during pregnancy and beyond, because of the continuous development of the fetus. And I'm sorry, this doesn't extend into childhood, because there is continuous development in children under 5. So I want to say that my work has been funded by a long series of grants from the National Institutes of Health, especially the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences, and in part, some of my work has been funded by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I have no conflicts of interest to declare. Here, I have a long list of collaborators and graduate students who I've been really fortunate to work with over the past 30 years. I have a new set of collaborators through the CHIP Consortium, and I'm very happy to be working with them now to really look at child health under the age of 5. And thank you so very much, and I think we'll have questions now.
Thank you for your And now, this is the session of discussion, and I will give the opportunities to 5 people to give the question, 3 from this room and 2 from the webinar. So if you guys want to ask a question, so keep your hand. I will count 1, 2, 3, then you raise your hand, and I will choose 3 people, okay? 1, 2, 3. Okay, 1 from there, and grade 1 and also the boys. The boys over there. Okay, you can go to the mic. Okay, yes, you can go to the mic. The standing mic, we have that. And also for the center, you can go to the mic. And for the boys there, you can go to the mic.
Good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Rini Ahmasari. I'm from postgraduate in Faculty of Public Health, Universitas of Indonesia. First, I want to say thank you for Mrs. Pam Factor about your presentation. I'm so interested about your presentation today. Because my research about is similar like your presentation about livestock localization to find out relation with stunting in children under 5. Even I not find out the relationship of livestock localization with stunting in children, but I find out exposure of smoke with stunting in children. My question is, even I had find out some literature that is so literature for to explain that exposure of smoke in for to make stunting in children under 5. Maybe you can more explain about that, and maybe you can give me some information where more literature for to make me can get some explain for that. Thank you.
And for the second question.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Kili Wamina Zahra. And my questions will be to Yasmin and Isabel. Why children, and specifically the under 5 children? Because when you said you did the transfer and all the social mapping through the community champions, meeting all those parents, I was like, there's got to be a lot of children in the community, and possibly not all of them are under 5 children. So do you only interview and talk to the mothers of the under 5 children and asking the samples of their children, or do you actually talk to the other mother that possibly not having the other children? And how do you successfully get their approval on giving out their children's sample? Because I saw the sample and it's quite challenging to get from under 5 children, and some of them are also painful. And so how do you gain success on that one? Thank you.
The third question.
Well, thank you very much for listening to my question. My name is Harun. I'm the fourth semester on this Faculty of Public Health at Universitas Indonesia. My question is for Professor Pham. Actually, I have some friends that before they are smoking, but actually they change to the cigarette to vaping. Yeah, and what is your? I just want to ask you, what's your opinion? What do you think about people who are using vaping? The effect for the woman who pregnancies, because we know that the smell from vaping is like interesting smell actually than cigarette. So I just interesting about what the effect for the pregnant woman. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are all very, very interesting and incredibly important questions. Regarding stunting, I think that there are many environmental factors that are associated with stunting in children. starting with exposures probably during the mother's childhood and the mother's period of time prior to the time when she became pregnant. And the challenge is how to identify those factors that are important even prior to her becoming pregnant. And it really involves the use of longitudinal studies, which are I know, I do them all the time, they're very, very difficult to do. There may be environmental chemicals associated with stunting. We do know from some of my earlier work that exposure to a class of chemicals called polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, and pesticides like DDT, they're all chlorinated hydrocarbons, that they're associated with decreased height in children, prenatal exposure associated with decreased height. That's a rather old literature, actually. We do know that there probably is also associations between decreased height in children and exposure to heavy metals like lead, especially high levels of exposure. Now, I don't know of much work right now on the non-persistent chemicals like phthalates, but I have a colleague who's doing work on phthalates and obesity, and he does find that phthalates are associated with increased risk of obesity in children. But there are other factors as well, and I think looking at the entire exposome, the water pollution, the air pollution, the other kinds of social factors like growing up with poor nutrition as well, introduction of complementary feeding prior to and stopping breastfeeding early, all are likely related to an increased risk of stunting. And so a lot of it involves public health education and intervention programs, and a lot of focus on intervention and implementation science. So I'd also like to address the vaping question. So vaping is relatively new. Vaping, you mentioned that the compounds that your friends put in their e-cigarettes smell very good. That probably means that they're not tobacco. In the US, there's been a lot of very recent work with young people who have become very seriously ill from lung disease due to vaping. And it's due to vaping of non-nicotine compounds. So those contain harmful chemicals. They're usually not bought from reputable dealers. They're bought in sort of corner stores where they have many of these compounds to vape that smell very nice. Yes, they do, but they have harmful chemicals. These young people who have been vaping have been admitted to hospital with serious lung damage. And this is it has the potential to become a very large problem. Let's not even deal with pregnant women right now. It's just young people who are vaping. And I think that e-cigarettes with nicotine can be useful for people who are trying to stop smoking, as long as they also eventually stop using nicotine or tobacco e-cigarettes. I think that vaping other chemicals has the potential to be very harmful. And that's all over the English-based medical literature now, with papers in the New England Journal of Medicine, in the Journal of the American Medical Society, and others. And so vaping is just very harmful.
So I'll just answer. Is that working?
Maybe that one.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Rick, that's that. Is that okay? So I'll answer your question now. So yeah, so the reason for going for children under 5 is it's very simple. Actually, it's just the fact that it is a critical period in developing, just like physical development and mental development. And I think Pam sort of like covered it a little bit as well. And not only that, but also mortality in children under 5 in the world is actually very high. We have over 50,000 children, under 5 children dying every day in the world. So it's a huge problem. It's definitely something that we need to address. So that's why we went for that topic in particular. And regarding the samples and the collection of samples, so yes, every community that we went to, we tried to talk to moms of children who are under 5. It doesn't have to be a specific age. It could be 2 months old, a year-old, 5 years old. And the reason why we did that is, well, number one, because it wouldn't really make sense for us to just go back and talk to the parents of children who are like 10, for example, because that wouldn't be as relevant to. It's extremely relevant and an important. It's important to look at that as well, but not to the study that we're trying to conduct. Now, so the other thing about that is as Pam kind of touched on it a little, is our studies, but we didn't mention that earlier, but our study isn't going to be one time point. We're trying to come back for multiple time points. We were developing a strategy for it, and so trying to come back for that, it would be something, the younger the children, the better, because we can see change over time, and we are trying to tackle those changes in children who are under 5. So that's another reason why we only focus on that. Now, I completely agree with what you were saying in terms of, it is very difficult, and we are very well aware of that as well, and 100% agree. But that's precisely why we did the feasibility study. So before we come back and we develop a very complex protocol, we identify all the different partners, apply for funding, and all of the process that goes into it. We want to make sure that there is actually a chance of success. Now, as I said earlier, and I completely agree as well, it is much easier coming in with a piece of paper and asking the parent, is it okay to do that? Would you be willing to do that? But when we come back and they potentially see, for example, the needles, and they see their babies and they're crying, and there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of commotion, it is a completely different reality. But that is why we interview people as well. So we interviewed them about, so for example, we went to one of the communities here, actually, and there was a mother who, she was more conservative, and we didn't want to offend her in any way. We wanted to make sure she was okay with the procedures, and we made sure to ask her, for example, would you prefer us brought in a woman who is a nurse or a doctor who, a woman who's a doctor to, do the data collection. She didn't have a problem with that. She said, it's not a problem. You can bring me in. It's for, medical procedures. We don't mind. So it is something that we've been trying to really be conscious of and really try to assess when we're in the field. But yes, that's the other thing about studies and field work is that you can only you can plan for it and you can account for all of those sort of challenges. But it doesn't mean that it will work out. But that's why you need to look at a sample size. You need to look at how to, even for example, longitudinal studies, you need to look at retention rates. So yes, so it is challenging. It is challenging. But the reason we started out with the feasibility study was to see, are there even any mothers who would say yes to this? And we are very aware that we're going to come in and there's going to be parents who are going to be like, actually, we don't really want to do that. Even though they were willing to do it at the beginning. If children start crying and they feel bad for their babies, I can understand that. But it is a process, and the community leaders were very supportive, and they said that they would help out with that as well. So it's all about being sensitive to the situation, and obviously I cannot tell you that we're going to get 100% of people saying yes, but yeah, so those are things that we do take into account as well.
Because we haven't any online questions, so I will open the discussion again to all the people here for 3 questions. You want to give a question? Okay, you can go to the mic, standing like that, and then, okay, you can go to the standing mic there, and for this side, I see someone. Is there anyone who wants to give a question?
Good morning, my name is Nadia Dalai from
also Yasmin have done. Earlier you had stated that even if you did have the perfect plan and also you, what's called accounted for every aspect, you would never be able to guarantee what would happen in the field. My question is that in the three contrasting countries, which were Chile, Indonesia, and also India, that you visited, what challenges were identical to each country, and also which ones were more pertaining to the communities themselves? Like what kinds of specific challenges did you face in each community? Thank you.
Okay, the second information.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, my name is Arjun Prananda from Public Health Student. I will ask to Ms. Yasmin and Isabel. Well, we know that the death of the children under 5 is still exists, especially in rural areas, and there is not access and not reachable. To enter the population, there must be obstacle. The obstacle in Indonesia, there are rural areas that have the potential to can reaches and have some result, but they don't want to accept the outside influence and they like the situation, so they don't want the on the place to have some visions. That's it. And so when we look for a new population or try a little bit harder to the population that can we reach or try to another population that maybe we can reach. So for the, if you want to make a business, we have some thing that we can be covered. And the second one is, I'm wondering how long you study about culture in Indonesia, because you're using the culture base to have research, and how long, and do you have some pattern, or do you know what's the children or pattern like in that area or anything? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So to answer the first question, so Isabel, you can start. So we'll just do both of us going to answer that because Isabel, when she did the India trip, I was there for that, and then I did Indonesia and Chile, so we're just going to build on each other's answers. So you can go ahead first.
So I visited Jaipur in India, which is in the state of Rajasthan. The difficulties that I found in the communities in Jaipur slums is that many of the mothers were illiterate. So there were difficulties with allowing them to understand all the procedures of the sampling, as well as the consents and the information that we have to give to make sure that they are fully understood. A lot of mothers were quite young as well, and they were migrated from other parts of India, mainly from Bihar and UP. Hence why they might be able to speak their local language in those areas, but may not be the same language we speak in Jaipur. And lastly, most of the mothers had children at the age when they were teenagers, so around 16, 17. So they might not have the opportunity to learn about infection. So when we asked about what the community in those Jaipur communities think about infections or diseases, they had difficulties of understanding the question sometimes, and hence why we had to be more careful how we approach those matters. Yes, we will talk about how Jakarta and Afghanistan were different and similar to other countries.
Yeah, so and then building on the challenges actually in Jakarta and Chile. In Jakarta, we actually, it went very smoothly, and again, because we had such great support, cannot say that enough, it was incredible. But I will say this, one of the potential challenges for future data collection, for example, is how can I say this? So, for example, we would do interviews with, let's assume we're talking to one specific mother, and there were always other mothers around. There were always other people around. And so that is one of the, and that doesn't sound like it's like a negative thing, and it isn't in the sense that, okay, people are here, they understand what we're
But that sort of has an influence on the answers, right? And the way people react to what we're saying. So if you feel peer pressure, if you have one mother who was just interviewed 2 seconds ago, and she said yes to everything, and you're sitting there and you know them, and they know who you are, you're more likely and more inclined to say the same thing. So, which is why probably one of the reasons our numbers are very high. So yes, they're very optimistic, and going back to what Zara has asked earlier, it sounds amazing, but it is a challenge actually, because we cannot rely on those numbers 100%. You need to be realistic about things. And that's the challenge of field work in general, is knowing that even though it sounds great, and it sounds like it's gonna work out perfectly, it has to be culturally, and that kind of ties back to, sort of goes into the next question as well, because obviously our methods and our protocols are gonna be, they have to be consistent, right? We can't come into Jakarta and do one type of, use one type of methodology, and then go to Chile and do something completely different if we're trying to compare and contrast. But what we do need to do is you need to tweak it a little, right? So for example, and Pam can actually build on this if she would like later. So if we're going to be asking certain questions here, I'm not going to take your sword from you, Pam, so you can share that later. But, so right now we're actually working on a potential questionnaire for when we come back. And there's like one of them, there's a little story, short, like a 1 minute sort of like story to explain what we're trying to ask the participant. Now, what works here might not work in India. For example, they're talking about cats, they're talking about mice, and that might not be something that the children are familiar with here, for example. So you do tweak it a little to make sure that the people in that community understand what's going on. So that was in Jakarta. I know I go in circles, so if you can edit that out later, that's great. But I would say this, so in Chile, for example, because each of the countries that we're going to are completely different. No matter how close they are with each other, if they're in the same region or not, every country is completely different. So in Chile, for example, the challenge was much more complex. It's on the community level. So it's not individual level in which we come in and then the parents are not, on the fence about it and they're not really sure whether or not they want to take part. It's more the complexity of the community. So unfortunately in Latin America, which, in Chile, there is a lot of violence. There is a lot of, drug dealings going on, and it is a challenge. And even coming into the community, the people were incredible, very welcoming. But there are certain times of the day, there are certain parts of the community that you shouldn't really go to, which is again another reason why we need people who are very familiar with the reality of the community. So, those are certain challenges that come with it, and obviously it doesn't matter the country, you always have some challenges that you need to overcome to be able to reach, the final point. But, so those are just that, and then in terms of like how similar they are, if I'm being completely honest, I think, yes, the reason why we're going to these three particular countries is because they have a similar reality in terms of, like, as we showed earlier, in terms of the health challenges that they have. So it's not like we're coming into Chile thinking, oh, it doesn't have, the reality here does not match the reality in India or Indonesia at all. That's not the case. The levels or the severity, that's not a great word, but the severity of the problem is different. But we do have very similar situations, if you can find that in all three countries. And yeah, so in terms of like doing it culturally in a culturally sensitive manner, it really is about co-developing, co-designing a project. I mean, everywhere we're going, we're talking to, again, saying that earlier, with community champions, we're talking to university or academic partners that we have in each country, and it really is about engaging the community, engaging other academics, so that we can have a better idea of how to approach, each community, each group of people, because I don't know the reality of each country. Chile, for example, I'm from Latin America, and I couldn't just come in and say, oh, I know what happens here. I don't. Every community is completely different. So we just need to be aware of those things.
To build on that, of course, we didn't have time to explain about the other stages of CHIP project. However, we will be expanding this, and hopefully after all the analysis, we will conduct focus groups to understand how we could co-design the intervention methods with the community and by the community. So we're not doing this as our own project. Like we say, we're using the citizen science approach. Residents who might be not scientists to be involved in this project as much as we are. So including data collection, they will not be the participants of the sampling procedures, but also they're going to be the data collectors using OpenStreetMap, updating any local sources or things that we might not know, but they know more and very well, to be uploaded into a software, hopefully will be developed in next stage of our CHIP protocol, to be able to have all the data from other sources and within the community to participate in this project as much as we are. So hopefully, once we have that focus group and pilot study, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to some of the policymakers of those communities, that'd be a good opportunity to really using the cultural methods in the research.
So I will just add to that just a little bit. I've worked in quite a number of countries during my career. We always find that things need to be incredibly adapted to the nature of the country we're working in. For example, I'm starting a study in Ghana, in a community where other people in Colombia have worked before, in a rural community. And we're using a test of school readiness in children under the age of 5. And we'll be using the same one here in Jakarta, should we be able to. In part of that test, and I didn't go myself, I sent a student there actually, which probably was a bit of a mistake, because she was just very enthusiastic and started doing this test with the local partners. And part of the test is showing the child a picture of a cow, and then having the picture in 4 pieces and having the child put together the puzzle of 4 pieces of cow. Well, in Ghana, they don't have cows. They have goats. And if I were there, I would have known that, because I would have gone through the test with my partner, and the partner would have said, the children don't know cows, they know goats. We would have had a picture of a goat and substituted the goat. So it needs a lot of preparatory work with the community and with the partners in developing, taking the instruments and adapting them to be very culturally appropriate. Similarly, we always assess the home environment. Homes are very different in different areas of the world, and we adapt the instrument to be sensitive to what's happening in the local community. I also want to say one thing about studying children under the age of 5. There's a World Health Organization move to study the first 1,000 days of life, and that's really children age 3 and under. Children age 3 and under represent a particularly vulnerable population to environmental and nutritional insults, and that can go up to the age of 5. Once you don't stop having the potential to be harmfully affected by things in your environment after the age of 5, but 5 and under, you're particularly vulnerable. And I think that the CHIP focus on age 5 and under comes from that kind of scientific literature. Thank you.
Is there anyone who wants to give a question? Okay, only one, because this is the last.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Saudi, and I would like to address my question to Yasmin and Isabel. As you mentioned before, you did an assessment that consists of transect walks, and then social mapping, and also several interviews with parents whose children under 5, and also the comics readers. So I wonder, Did you guys find any health problems that are related to the culture of the community itself? Because I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in Indonesia, there are some parents who usually chew the food first before feeding it to the children. Because maybe they think that the mother's saliva can add more nutritional benefits to the food. And one more, during the research, did you do any interventions as well? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think the thing that I'm just trying to get to make sure I answer the question, which I did. So any problems? Yeah. So well, I wouldn't necessarily say that I identify problems. I think, you know, before you do an analysis and before you have like a thorough or better like understanding of what's going on, we were here for, 10 days. It's not, we don't sort of know what's happening, but we can't conclude anything. Yes, there are, you can have an idea of what's going on, and it's something that is potentially a risk, but I couldn't make any conclusion. So I wouldn't say that I know that there are problems. Now, that said, there were things that we've identified that could potentially be a problem, and I didn't necessarily see what you just mentioned regarding the food, but we do see children, so for example, children walking around, barefoot everywhere they go, and then, especially where there's like a lot of animals, there are a lot of chicken that we saw, a lot of birds. They play a lot with the birds. There were quite a few birds in the communities that we visited. In Koja in particular, it's a different reality. I think that's another thing that's important to, to talk about is that, what might be a problem, quote unquote problem in one community might not be a problem in the other, or might not be as present. So for example, in Koja, the reality is very different. So you have, they live near, very close to a dumping ground. So obviously the risks and the risk factors in that community are completely different. But you do see some, sort of, things that are potentially problematic. And I can, so for example, so obviously you're asking about Indonesia. So in Puntengan, if anybody has visited Puntengan, they have a river. It's a river that, goes through, it goes through the community. And we did see a lot of, we did see families disposing of their trash and garbage in the river. We do see children playing around that area a lot. There was another dumping ground where there were a lot of chicken, a lot of dogs, mostly chicken actually. And you do see children just walking around, roaming around, everywhere. So you see a lot of that. You see, for example, we asked parents about, do they wash vegetables, do they wash their fruit? And it's not something that everybody does. We saw a lot of children, sneezing and then just on their hands and, just not cleaning it up or not, cleaning it up, on anything or wiping it down. So you see certain things like we saw in, all the different communities that we visited. So yes, we do see things that are potentially problematic and that could fall in the infection pathway. Yes. Would you want to get? That's it. Thank you.
Okay, because discussion session, the time of discussion session has been delayed, so our session is in the end of our session. And then now we are going to give our biggest appreciation to our prominent speakers. So I will invite the representative of FKM and also the representative of Indonesia, Professor Sudarto, Professor Agus, and also Professor Kusari Sukani, to give the certificate and placard to our prominent speakers. Okay, the first one is from Professor Sudarto to give the certificate to Professor Tom. Pak Tolipa, maybe you can stand there. take the pictures. Okay, thank you so much to Professor Pam, Pak Khalid Pak, to be our speakers. And the second one is for Yasmin from the Professor Agus Suwandono as the representative of Indorwood. Okay, for Yasmin, Ibu Anasi, MPA. Okay, this is the placard for Yasmin. Okay, and this is the souvenir for Yasmin from Professor Agus. And Professor, take a picture first. Okay, thank you. And last but not least is for our beautiful speakers, Isabel Yasmin. For Professor Gus. This is the placard from Isabel from Professor Gus. Okay, take the picture first. Okay, for the speakers to stay at the stage because Professor Gus, please stay at the stage. And also I will invite all the professors of other health class, Professor Ahmadi, Professor Sudarto, Global Health class, and also Dr. Dewi Nur Aisyah, and also Mr. We're going to have the group pictures together. Okay, to all the speakers and also the lecturers, you can back to your seat. Now, we hope all the speakers and also lecturers come back to the chair because we're going to have the photo with all the audience. Photographer is ready.
Is everybody ready? Yes. Let's do it.
Okay, everybody ready? Okay, 1, 2, 3, the first shot. Say cheese. We're using this camera. Okay, 1, 2, 3. One more time. Say cheers. Okay. All that finished. Thank you so much for all our excellent speakers, for our lecturers who come to this event, and also for all the participants. Thank you. I'm Asri as the Master